we actually see real practical progress on the ground. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Eugenie Said.
Speaker, Happy New Year to you, sir, and to other members of this House and their families. Pleased to take a call on the Subantarctic Islands Marine Reserves Bill, which, as Gareth Hughes explained, the Green Party will be strongly supporting. And congratulate the Minister for his stewardship of this bill, for getting it to the House, and for his commitment to establishing a record number of marine reserves this year. But we would also like to see progress on the marine reserves legislation, because, as Phil Twyford pointed out, it is outdated, it is cumbersome. There have been a number of promises by National and by the previous Minister to introduce a new Marine Reserves Bill. One has languished before Select Committee for over a decade and not progressed. And given that collaborative processes are flavour of the month now, we would like to see some collaboration around that legislation. In a former life, I was a member of the West Coast Marine Protection Forum, which made a number of recommendations to the government on the reserves that are now going to be established. The reserves that conservation groups would have liked to have seen were somewhat larger than the ones that are being established. But that collaborative process was very valuable in getting everybody around the table, iwi, conservation groups, fishers and others, commercial and recreational fishers and divers, to actually work out where the common ground lay, to understand others' points of view, to understand what the areas were that were favoured by fishers. And again, here in this bill, it is the result of a collaborative process and a forum that was established to look at marine protection in the Subantarctic. So that is a process that was triggered by the Marine Protected Areas policy, which was introduced by the former Labor government. But there have been very few of these collaborative forums established under National, until quite recently, when one's been established, I think, in Otago. So they are a good process, but thank you, Minister, and Auckland. With legislation which is establishing protected areas and a review of the Marine Reserves Act, it would be useful, I think, when we're dealing with law that is creating benefits for present and future generations, which is protecting biodiversity for its intrinsic values, there shouldn't be the party political differences. We should be able to establish common ground. So it would be valuable, Minister, if there was some discussion between parties before the legislation was introduced to see whether and what sort of consensus could be agreed on the Marine Reserves Act, given that it failed before because of the widespread different views around it. So, Minister, we would encourage the government to look at similar consultation and a similar commitment to collaborative processes before new legislation is introduced, to that sort of collaboration that it is endorsing at a regional level in investigating individual marine reserves. Turning to this bill, we are pleased to support it. There is only one marine reserve in the Subantarctic Islands at the moment, and that's around the Auckland Islands, and that was established in 2003. The islands are really important. They do have World Heritage status because they are some of the least modified islands on the planet. So this bill is a step forward in giving us a marine reserve around the Antipodes Island and some protection around the Bounty Islands and the Campbell Islands. But don't want to disappoint the Minister. The Green Party believes that the bill could go further and could take on board the submissions by ECO, Forest and Bird, the Southland Conservation Board and others to protect the full extent of the territorial sea around the Bounty Islands and around the Campbell Islands, because the very strange boundaries around those islands are to ensure that the ling fishery continues and to allow for a speculative potential deepwater crab fishery. There have been investigations in the 1970s, the 1990s of that crab fishery. Nothing has come of it. Given the distance to the Subantarctic and the cost of diesel, it's unlikely to be profitable. The Green Party would see a proper commitment to marine conservation and marine protection by establishing the full extent of the territorial sea around those islands as marine reserves. That would recognise their internationally important values and World Heritage status. Nevertheless, this bill is a step forward. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Call Claudette Hauiti.
Ka tū ake a hau ki te mihi a koutou katoa ki ngā